Welcome back to In with Denoux.
Welcome back, everybody, to In with Denoux featuring Jordan Shannon. Last week we were able to start scrolling with the scriptures, and we went through my favorite story in Samuel 14 that talked about Jonathan and his armor bearer. And this week we're going to be walking through Jordan's favorite story. So if you saw the promo video, we are doing this periodically, and we'd love to start going through your favorite story. So please let us know what your favorite story in the Bible is. And we will study it out a little bit, and we'll do some episodes here and there on your favorite stories. And we are calling it Scrolling Through the Scriptures. So as we jump in, I'm going to throw it to Jordan, and we're going to talk through his favorite story, or one of his favorite stories in the Bible.
Yeah, appreciate that, brother. Yeah, I was looking through the scriptures just to kind of like get a sense of like what story really stands out, what really speaks to me. And I ain't gonna give that it's a cop out to say, well, there's so many to choose from, right?
Yeah.
I think if we really resonate and really sat down, you'll find one that really catches your eye. And for me, the passage that I come back to is in Joshua, the 14th chapter, verses 6 through 15. And it's the story of the allotment of Caleb. And this is actually a story that's an extension from an earlier story back in Numbers. So to kind of set the scene, in Numbers, the 14th chapter, the Israelites are getting ready to spy out the land of Canaan. They're getting ready to go into the promised land. And Moses sends out 12 representatives from across the tribes to go spy out the land to see, is it habitable? Is it good? Like, is this a place that we can feel like we can settle? And so when they went there, they came back, and Caleb and Joshua were two of the men that were part of that initial call. And so when they came back, 10 of the reports show that, like, hey, we're fearful. Hey, there's a lot of people there. They're big. They're scary. We're like ants, and they're like grasshoppers. They are so huge in our eyes. Like, I don't think we can take them down. But Caleb and Joshua had the heart of like saying, no, we can go there. Like, we can absolutely take that. This is our land. God gave it to us. Like, we can 100% go in there, and this is our place. But Moses and the people of Israel listened to the 10 other reports as opposed to Caleb and Joshua. And so because of that, God actually gave them the report. God gave them a message that said, the only people that will see my land are Joshua and Caleb, because they followed me wholeheartedly, because the rest of the people made Israelites' hearts melt with fear. So that was the premise. And what I love, and I like kind of like that little like context as to what's gonna be set up right here in Joshua chapter 14. I'll read it because it's not too long of a verse. It says right here, it says, now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me back from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. And I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. And this is Caleb continuing and continuing to push on that. So that's the first promise. And now in verse 10. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I am just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites. Then the land had rest from war. And I love this passage because there's just so many nuggets to really glean from it. But just this idea of like trusting in a promise and holding
Mm-hmm.
to that promise for 45 years. I became a Christian when I was 19 years old. And I remember like, declaring that Jesus is Lord and making him the Lord of my life and getting baptized and deciding to follow him. Something, and that was in 2011.
Yeah.
So now here we are, 14 years later, and I'm looking back on that experience, and if what I think I compare a lot to is that I don't always feel like, yeah, I'm just as fired up, or yeah, I just feel as convicted or inspired by the same promises,
Yeah.
to hold to say like, yeah, I'm gonna win so many souls for God, or I'm gonna tell people about my story. I don't always feel that. In fact,
Right.
like to my shame, I would say that I've really struggled a lot with that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm inspired by Caleb in the sense of that he remembered a promise that God gave to him, and he kept his end of like faith for that 45 years,
Yeah. Yep.
'cause I can imagine, like after maybe a year or two and the promise has not been fulfilled, you haven't seen that land, he could have easily just said, you know what, like I'll be here, I'll be smart, I'll just not ruffling feathers, but I don't know if I believe this anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
there's some ways that his faith could have gotten stagnant, but he's felt sustained. He felt sustained to the end to hold this conviction of, God's gonna grant me this opportunity to go into this land.
Yeah.
He said that, and
Yep.
I don't care how long it takes. I'm gonna be ready for when he calls me for that. It's almost like, since we're both sports fans and we talk about football, I feel like I have to use a football analogy real quick. I'm a Florida Gators fan. They just came off a brutal upset to a smaller school in our state. And it's been a long time since we've seen the Gators win a game and have hopes of like being hyper competitive. It's been
Mm-hmm.
nearly
Mm-hmm.
20 years. Like I grew up watching them. When I grew up, they were a big time team,
Yeah.
but they have not been really relevant on the national scene since then. And that's not like shade or anything. It's just the reality. Like that's just what is going on.
Right.
And at 80 years old, I feel like I'll still be as fired up of watching sports, but will I still have the faith to believe that, you know what, if you told me 40 years from now the Gators will win a national championship in football, right? Like, would I still be as fired up or excited? I don't
Right.
know. I probably wouldn't. I'd probably be like, I gotta wait 40 years just to watch my favorite team win something like this. And it's like,
Yeah.
well, like that changes the outlook a little bit, right? Like it,
Yeah.
and maybe that's part of like the human life is like we don't know the outcome of these things, but that's why faith is so important. That's also why fandom is so fun, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
random, but we put our hearts and trust in those things just in hopes of seeing an outcome that pays off. Another comparison, I don't like bringing them up, but it very much fits because they're a rival, Georgia. Before
Mm.
2021, Georgia hadn't seen a national championship in 40 years,
Yep.
and their fan base was really excited once. Rightfully so, right? Like we're talking about generations that hadn't seen it. So when they
Yeah.
finally got that, you can imagine the excitement that people felt once that actually came to be. And that still lit a fire and it's inspiration for, yeah, this is my fandom, this is my validation, this is my space to be in. Like I think I'm just inspired from Caleb of how do you keep the same energy that a promise will be fulfilled? How do you
Right.
keep the same energy of hope and trust and faith that, yeah, God is going to give me? And this is greater than obviously sports. This is like God's going to lead me into a land that's plentiful.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think what's also inspiring is Caleb is not just talking about like, hey, I'm going to be wanting to just settle in this land. He's talking about actually, hey, I'm going in there at 85 and I'm ready to fight.
Yeah.
I'm ready to
Yeah.
go in there and fight for our God for this land, to protect this land. So much so that the name of the land ended up changing, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it doesn't remember the people that was there. It was actually given there in honor of Caleb. And that, like I think back to even my own calling, like in 2011, I was like, yep, signed up to make Jesus Lord, and I signed up to tell people about him and to want to share the gospel and all these things, in hopes that people will come. Am I
Yeah.
still keeping that same, I guess, energy, or keeping that same heart to say, like, yeah, God's going to use me to help impact someone's spiritual journey? Am I
Right.
still keeping that same and like I said before at the beginning, I feel like I hadn't been, but stories like this, specifically this one with Caleb, like that's what I want. This is a faith that I want, that, when someone calls me at 30 or 35 or 19, when I'm 65, I want to still feel that same energy of like, yeah, God is to be glorified, and I'm still willing to fight in his
Yeah.
name. Um,
Yeah.
Fight for the truth in his name. But that is a question, man. Like, that's a question I have for you. Like, how do you keep that same energy? Because you've been a Christian for, 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I would love to hear from you, and obviously from people who are watching this. Like, feel free to comment. But what what keeps that energy of like saying like, yeah, I'm gonna go for God, and I'm gonna keep
Hmm.
this. It's almost akin to like our relationships, like a marriage or something, like, right? Like, you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
trying to maintain the same level of fervor, same level
Yeah. Yeah.
of love, of grace, of hope. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how do you
Yep.
how do you keep that? So I'm just curious for you, how do you
Yeah.
keep that same?
Yeah, yeah. So before I dive fully into the answer, I think that something I always have to tell myself when I'm reading in the scriptures is to know that we don't have every single detail of like those 45 years, right? So I think lots of
Yeah.
times we can romanticize stories in the scriptures and think that these people didn't go through difficult times like we do, right? Cuz the temptation can be to look at a story like this and be like, man, like, and before I say this, like, this is an unbelievable story, and like it's why people name their children Caleb, right? Like there's so many, like,
Yeah.
most of the Calebs I've met are like because of this story, like Caleb Summers, right? He's named after
Mhm.
Caleb because of this, kind of thing. And so, but the temptation can be like, man, like how was the fire going for Caleb the whole time? Which in general it was, right? But we don't get to see those moments where he was struggling, where he was like, man, like, do I want to keep doing this? And he had those moments without a doubt. So I think lots of times too, like we have to remember that we don't want to romanticize and think that Caleb is
Mhm.
somehow like Jesus, that he's like perfect,
Yeah.
although he's a great example to look up to, and he's a great man, obviously, like a great man of God. But I say that to say is that, like that, like I'm not nearly as good as Caleb, but I have moments, where it doesn't feel like that. Like you're asking, like, how do you keep that going? I've had moments where it's not going, but I do think, like,
Yeah.
you mentioned marriage, right? And I think that I've been thinking about this a lot with everything that I've been going through, is that, so often we throw out, and I'm trying to be careful with how I say this, but like, we throw out, these phrases of, I love you, and, saying these things with, and we know it in our mind, but sometimes it doesn't hit our heart, that like, just like our love
Yeah.
for God, like sometimes it's not always gonna be like it was right after we came out of the waters, right? Where we're like
Mm.
fired up, we're zealous, whatever. Sometimes it's a choice. I've had to do this a lot where,
Mhm.
I've shared this earlier on in the podcast about how when I was in high school, I decided to leave God for a period and then came back. And I always told myself, like, man, no matter how tough it gets, no matter how bad I'm doing, like, I'm not going to leave God again, like I might be struggling, I might be rebelling, but I'm not gonna, and I might not even be like living like a Christian all the time, but I was like, I'm not gonna physically leave, even if I'm checked out. And I know sometimes it's better, like if you're, lukewarm, like get out, whatever. But I'm just like, man, I gotta fight. Like I'm gonna fight. I'm not gonna leave God again, when the times get tough. So I do think that partially it's like sometimes just a choice. Advice I got one time about, something completely different, nothing like this, but still I think the lesson applies, is that lots of times you just have to do the action and the heart will follow, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's advice that you give a lot of people, like when you're studying the Bible with someone, right? Like, if they've never been to church before, or they don't really have a basis of faith. I'm like someone that didn't grow up like going to church or learning about God. Lots of times they hear it and they're like, it's so foreign to them, and you just got to kind of encourage them to like read the scriptures and see how it works, And lots
Yeah.
of times it's that action of just being like, okay, like I'm gonna give this a shot, and then the heart will follow. And I think that that
Yeah.
honestly goes like through our whole lives. Like sometimes like our heart's not gonna be in it, but if you do the righteous act, God will work. If you're doing what
Yeah.
God wants you to do and you're obeying, then the heart will follow, because God's not going to allow us to just become these people where we do the right actions and then our heart just stays hard. And I know it does take faith on our end and things like that, but I know for me, so I just wanted to like kind of set that baseline where it's like sometimes
Yeah.
it's a choice, like just like sometimes in a relationship and a marriage, like it doesn't feel lovey dovey, like it did right after you started dating or right after the marriage or whatever, but it's a choice. And if you say the words, then you got to back up the actions, even if it's not felt in that moment. You know what I mean? And so I think that is a big thing. But I think also, I do think that continuing to see that like the work is never done. And that's why I look up to people so much that are, in their twilight years or, empty nesters or things like that, that are like, they're not just like sitting on their laurels, right? They're not just like, basking in retirement. They're, I think about there's a couple. I don't know if you would know them or not, but the Montavos, Juan
Oh,
and Mary
yeah.
Montavo. Okay, so I knew them all growing up. I knew their kids, Greg and Kelly, growing up, and something that was just so cool is that so he was a fire chief, and then he also was like a chef, and they
Mm-hmm.
owned a home
I've
in
had
West
this
Palm Beach.
paella. Yeah.
Yes, his paella is fire. So shout out Juan. I would love for Juan to watch these. I'll let him know he got shout out in this episode. So, but yeah, they're amazing. And I know that people thought they were crazy so they owned a home. If I'm not mistaken, it was like paid off, like in West Palm Beach. And if you know, like South Florida, like real estate or owning a home in South Florida is sitting on a small fortune just because that the houses there are
Mm-hmm.
so expensive. And they had like a pretty nice home. I had been to their home a couple times growing up, and they decided to, if I'm not mistaken, sell their home. They bought an RV and they just traveled around the country, but specifically they were like going to churches and they would stay there for a while and like help out. Then they would go somewhere else. And they were enjoying it themselves too, like sightseeing and, things like that. And they post about it all the time. And I think I don't know if they still do that. They have grandkids and stuff now. But I think they do though, to be honest. And so I just thought it was cool that people thought they were crazy, like, why don't you guys just stay and enjoy your retirement? You're in South
Right.
Florida, whatever, whatever. But that was something that was on their heart and they did it. And that's just one example. There's so many that I could share of, people in their older years who give back, to the youth, that teach, that have, people in their home. I think about when I was in Orlando, the one of the few bright spots of the year I was in Orlando was there was this family, the Mangos. You know the Mangos?
Yeah.
Gabe and Steven, Leo and all them. Samantha, yeah, Sam, Gabe. I'm blanking on their oldest
Steven,
son's name.
right? Is it Steve?
No.
Steven's the
Ed,
youngest.
Ed.
Ed. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mary
So,
Kimball.
anyways,
I remember. Yeah.
yeah. So the
That's right.
Mangos, they would do this thing every Sunday. Every Sunday, it was called Starving Students, and it was for all the college students. And basically, they called it Starving Students because it was like starving for food and starving for the word. So basically, we'd all go over to their
Mm.
house Sunday night, and they would cook. And they were Mexican, and they could cook, and so they would cook like all this food, and we'd all eat. And then Mr. Phil, their dad, would do like a little lesson for us. And so it was like, starving for food, starving for the word. And I just thought that was so awesome, and they were people that, they weren't like rolling in the dough, so for every Sunday for them to
Mm.
provide food for us, like they were, they obviously had the means to do so, but like they could have put that money towards anything, and they every Sunday had it in their budget to, have that food for us, and just their time. I think I appreciated the time and the hospitality even more. And it allowed us to, I've shared little bits and pieces of my time in Orlando, but a big thing was just when I went down there, it just felt like there wasn't much culture there when I got there.
Mm.
It was like there was individuals and stuff that were doing really well, but it kind of felt split. Like it felt like there was two sides of the ministry, and people, it just, no one was on the same page is what it felt like. And so, we started I asked Mr. Phil if we could, I'm sorry, I know this story is kind of random, but I'm kind of making a point here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Mr. Phil allowed us to, we had this idea where, we were like, before we could really start like going out and inviting people into church and studying the Bible, people like we as Christians that are here, like we need to get on the same page. So we had a night where, Mr. Phil allowed us to kind of lead it. And we kind of like came up with topics and themes and things that we felt like would be important to get on the same page. And then each week for like a 2-month period, we picked one of those topics. We all studied it out individually that week. And then we came together and we tried to get on the same page about those things. And we were like, is this, because you know how it talks about like disputable matters, like things that are like salvation issues, like we need to be on the same page. And then there's like disputable matters where it's like, you can have your opinion, It's not like,
Right.
salvation issue kind of thing. And so we kind of decided like, hey, like, is it okay if we all have different opinions on this? And then, hey, we need to like decide what we believe with like all together kind of thing, which was really cool. And so I say that to say is that they set a great example to where as I've gotten older, I want to be someone that's like, whether I'm like on staff, not on staff, like I want to be a pillar of the church community in the church, wherever I am. I want my house to be open and I want to be able to teach and I want to be able to learn from the youth as well. But I think that is part of, keeping that vigor for God, keeping that fire for God. No matter how long you've been a Christian or how old you get, is to know that God is never done with you until you breathe your last breath, and even then, you got eternity with him. He's not done with you ever. So I think that's something that I think about. And I know the last like few years, like kind of being in this odd situation has been tough for me, but that's why it's been super encouraging, like, bringing up my barber, that I've been able to like talk with him a lot, and going to this new church yesterday kind of like has just kind of set a fire of like, okay, like how can I learn from people, but how can I help, people learn more about God or further their dream, for God, or learn more about their faith, things like that has kind of been put on my heart for the last like year and a half. And it's just been now kind of finding ways to do it, which has been super, super cool. And so there's a lot of answers to that question, but I really do think it's looking back and helping people, I think, it talks about, I think we talked about this last week even, is, the scripture in Jeremiah that talks about like, the word is a fire in my bone. Like it's, I can't keep it inside kind of thing. And I think that is swayed, like I said, back and forth, through and sometimes I get too caught up on myself, right? And myself. And I even realized that going through all this stuff that I'm going through now is realizing that sometimes, even though I know it almost sounds like a oxymoron, like I'm saying that, how sometimes people are like, what is your weakness? And they say something that's like good. I feel like that's what I'm kind of doing, but I really don't mean it that way. But I was realizing that like, so last year, going through everything that I'm going through right now, like I was kind of thinking through that, man, I didn't do a good job of taking what I was doing spiritually and like helping others with it, is the way I'll put it, just because I'm still not really ready to talk about everything I'm going through, but like on the podcast anyways. But yeah, like last year I read through the Old Testament. I was doing like the reading plan where you like read through the Bible in a year, but I just did the Old Testament basically. So, but I just did that myself. I didn't like take it and like talk about it with other people. I didn't like help, this, I didn't use it. I just kind of, like I was saying, I did keep it inside. Like I did like a fire in my bones. It was like just a spark in my bones that was like fun for me, but I didn't use it to help, everything that I had going on in my life. So I think that there's that aspect too, is that, you shouldn't be reading the word just for knowledge's sake, or if it's like fun for you, but you should be sharing it with others. Like it's not meant to be kept to ourselves, like what was the point? Like what was the point of Jesus coming and dying for me if I'm just like, I keep that story to myself? And so I think like those things, like reminding ourselves of those things, because we can get caught up in church life, right? Where it's like, we go on Sunday, we worship, we have our church friends, and then that's it, And I've gotten caught up in that cycle, and we make it about ourselves. So to answer your question, I think like the biggest thing for me has been learning from those that are older than me and seeing how much they are still excited to be hospitable, to teach people what they've learned through the years, and also to like share their mistakes, to like share their shortcomings and help people not have to make those same mistakes. And I know that's something that's been big for me, working with teenagers a lot, in my adult life has been allowing them into my ugly stuff, you know, in
Yeah.
a healthy way, but kind of letting them know, like, hey, these are the things that I've done and these were the consequences. Like, you don't have to go through them. Like, I can tell you, you know, what the consequences were, and I don't want you to have to go through those things. So I think there's a lot of that. And, you know, I would love, like, I wish we could hear Caleb, right? Like, what his answer to that question would be of that
Yeah.
45 years. And I think that's something that is and sorry, I'll end after this. I know I'm kind of rambling, but
No, there's a lot,
something
bro.
that,
There's a lot to it.
yeah, this story is layered, man. Like, you picked a good one. But yeah, I think that, you know, I think through, like, you know, as older Christians, like when you get to 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, I think through, I've seen a lot of older Christians that look to, you know, a Christian that got baptized 6 months ago and then they're, you know, up on stage preaching, or they're in a relationship and you've been waiting for 20 years for, like, you know, and they kind
Mhm.
of look at that with like envy or greed kind of thing. And I think something else that's kind of helped me to kind of keep my vigor is to remember that, like, God doesn't owe me anything. Like, I owe God
Mm.
everything. And to also remember that, like, just to use an example, obviously, like, because, you know, you're married and I'm single, is that, like, when I look at Jordan, like, I don't look at, like, Jordan as like, oh, he's so lucky and he has this, and it's not that Jordan deserves it and I don't. Like, nobody deserves to, like, have a wife or have a husband. Like,
Mm.
that's a blessing that God has given to some. And so I think, like, looking at things like that too, right, is that God has blessed me with so much. God has blessed us all with so much, and we don't deserve any of it, you know? Like,
Yeah.
any good thing in our life we don't deserve. And so I think that's something else, is that it's not about me, right? It's not about what I have or what I don't have or what that person has that I don't. It's like God's grace is sufficient for me. God's love is everything. It's always enough and it will never not be enough. And so I think just reminding myself of those things is kind of looking at the blessings in my life, looking at the things God has done for me, where he's brought me from, you know, remember the path I was going down when I didn't, you know, when I walked away from him. So I think all those things combined, hopefully that answers your question well. But I really appreciate the older people that God has put in my life through the years. You know, some have been constants and some have been for a period of time. But I feel like I've learned so much from other people, from God's family. You know, I'm sure Caleb leaned on God's people through those 45 years.
Yeah.
So if I could say anything, I would say that. So I'll end it there. Sorry, I rambled a
Yeah.
long time.
Oh man. So something that I'm sitting with is you know, in this 9 verses that we read, we get a
Mm-hmm.
context of 45 years. We get a context of like Caleb being so like connected and reminded of like a promise. But and I agree. I think we can mistake like this idea of like, oh, he was always fired up those 45 years, ignoring
Right.
the fact that he's human. He's around
Yep.
people who were likely discouraged or
Yeah.
largely fearful. Like he was around Moses, like one of
Yeah.
the most spiritual people in the history of just faith. So given all that context too, it does give us some I guess like message or inspiration around like what can we glean from people around us that help keep us and sustain us. I am always inspired when I see people who have been in a faith like 15, 20, 30 plus years
Yeah.
and are humble. You know,
Yeah.
humility is a really powerful like virtue for people to have. I think especially in our day and age when we have so much knowledge at our fingertips, literally at our fingertips, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
literally have AI bots that can search and find, you can ask any question and it gives you an answer right then and there.
Yeah.
But I think like just this idea of like, you know what? No, like God, I believe God, I believe in his word.
Mm-hmm.
I like I know of people who have served um roles of leadership, like whether it be pastor, elder, evangelist, all these things, but then who served in that role for decades, but who
Yeah.
ask questions as if they had just got baptized a day before. And
Yeah.
not from a place that they don't know more, but it's more of like, hey, what do you think? Hey, I really want to
Mm-hmm.
consider your input on this. Like to someone who just like learned about Jesus. And that's humility, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I always remember this story. When I was living in New Jersey, there's an elder, and his belief is that he's like, every Sunday, I believe that God is going to speak to me. It doesn't matter who is preaching. It doesn't matter how old the person is preaching. As
Yeah.
long as
Yeah.
there's scripture, God is going to speak to me. So he goes to service every time expecting God to speak directly to him. And
Yeah.
it could be a sermon he's heard 1,000 times, like, or a verse he's heard 1,000 times. But he's like, no, like, there's something in that message that is meant for me specifically. I'm like, that's
Mhm.
humility.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
how often do we hear the same songs or the same scriptures and think like, well, I've dissected that. I have the knowledge, right? Like
Yeah.
I've
Yeah.
been there, done that, right? Like,
Yeah.
and to be frank, we probably all have to some degree, right? Like we have read this or we have explored it, but to think that we have deciphered this or even come close to understanding the full totality of these texts is foolishness, right? Like
Uh-huh.
that's
Uh-huh.
arrogant. But we display some aspects of that, but I love that story because this guy, he's an elder and he's been in his faith for 50 plus years and
Yeah.
still has that same heart. Like that to me is like an example of Caleb. Shout out Tommy Bean. That for one to just put that out there because I have so much deep respect for him. But yeah, I just think about like we don't have to have that same emotion of like, yeah, be fired up and same as you were as 19, right? Like
Yeah.
I think age and your personality grows, your brain isn't even fully developed at that time, right?
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah. Yeah.
you're learning a lot about yourself, but there's still a heart part of like a heart issue around like, when I hear this message and I believe in these promises, do I still believe that these promises ring true
Uh-huh.
20,
Uh-huh.
30, 40, 50 plus years from now, right? Even
Yeah.
if I get married or I don't get married, if I have children, if I don't have children, if I get that promotion or don't get that promotion, if I get the job I want versus not getting a job, or if I go to school where I want to or move to the area, right? Like even if I
Uh-huh.
don't get things that I quote unquote feel like I want or feel like I deserve. I love that you brought that part up because that
Yeah.
feeling of like what we deserve is so much sometimes feels tied to how fired up or how
Yeah. Yeah.
on you know what I mean? Like how
Yeah.
like it sometimes can be culturally a part of that. Like if you're not as fired up, then you don't deserve to have X, Y, and Z. And it's like, hold up now. Like God never promises us any of that. Another shout out to my man Kai Lee. He's down in Houston. He's evangelist down in Houston. But he was telling me this is back when we were both in Jersey. I remember feeling like something was unfair. I remember feeling like, man, why is so and so getting the opportunity to? It might have been like speaking, or it might have been like the opportunity to like lead something. I was like, I feel
Uh-huh.
like I should get that opportunity. I feel like I deserve it. And
Right.
Kai looked me straight in my face and he said, Jordan, be careful with that. You don't ever want to get
Yeah.
into a conversation with God about what you deserve
That's right.
because what we deserve, if we're being honest, is we don't deserve salvation. Like, right? Like
Yeah.
if we think about like sin and we think about holiness, think about perfection, like humans don't naturally just deserve salvation. Now God
Yeah.
graces us with it. Like that's not
Yeah.
something we should be clamoring for. Like we don't want God to be fair with us.
That's right.
We want him to be good with
What's that?
us. You know,
That Lecrae line. If we fought for our rights, we'd be in hell tonight. That's probably like
yeah,
his
yeah.
best, like one of his best lines. I'm like,
That's a
wow,
bar. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
true.
I gotta give a shot. I gotta listen to that track again. Just
Yeah.
because like it's true though, right? Like that's essentially the crux of grace and the cross.
Uh,
And Caleb in this story is not so much saying I deserve this inheritance.
yeah.
He's just relaying back a promise that he was given 45 years earlier. Like God
Yeah.
had said
Yeah.
that he is going to see this place. And so now that
Uh-huh.
he's going to see this place, he's like, hey, wait a second. Let me just remind y'all. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
this is not for himself. It's more of like I'm doing this I'm gonna drive out the people there for the Lord,
Uh-huh.
like and
Uh-huh.
all in this commission of like being sanctified by God. Um
Yeah.
so I think it's important to contextualize that as well within this story of like, yeah, we don't need to have this. It's unrealistic of us to expect to keep the same emotion for 45 years because
Right.
emotions change, life changes, energy just naturally changes. I'm a a husband with a child, 2 dogs, working full time. Like that's very different from when I was 19 and
Yeah.
going to
Yep.
school, right? And unattached, right? Like and didn't have money, right? Very, very different context. And in some cases, like this is getting into another space, but I even think about like, am I just as generous as I was back then, right?
Yeah.
Like, am
Yeah.
I like, when I was 19, I was like, man, I ain't got no money, like, but I'll give $1 or give this to the church because you know what, like, I ain't got nothing. God gonna use it better. Am I
Yeah.
giving more now that I am, 15 years in and now have like a job? Like, am I keeping that energy to give back?
Right.
I hope, right? Like, like analyze my life. If God analyzed my life, like I hope that would be said the same way. And I
Yeah.
do believe I am in terms of a
Sure.
transparency based on like stuff like that. But it's just like it's just keeping that same kind of like how does this look and does it transfer into your life? Like you said around like it's not enough to just read the Bible for its knowledge content piece. Like are you are you practicing it? Are you aiming to practice and live by it, right? And are you doing so
Yeah.
with humility and grace for yourself? Um and 45 years later it should look different, but the heart should still like there should still be some retention of message of like, yeah, I trust God,
Yeah.
because that's what
Yeah.
we see with Caleb in the story, right? Like,
Yeah.
I imagine that 45 years it looked very different at different times. I'm depressed. I'm feeling like discouraged. I'm watching people like even at 85 years, like it's a completely different generation.
Yeah.
None of
Yeah.
his friends are there. Like,
Yeah. That's
let's
right.
put that into context too. Like, none of his friends are around, and yet he's still saying, "No, let's go into this hill country and conquer."
Yeah.
I have
Yep.
trouble moving to new places and making friends, and part of that is my
Mm-hmm.
own introversion, but other part of that is just yeah, I say introversion, just the shyness and stuff, but it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes
Yeah.
energy, and we've been out here for the last 6 years, and I feel like we do have good friends now, but it's like this thing of we need to make sure we are continue to pour into those communities, right? Like it's not that Chase and I haven't lived in the same city since 2014. You
Yeah.
know,
Dang. Yeah. That's
it's been
crazy.
a minute, man. And yet and while we still feel connected, we
Yeah.
hopefully this isn't the only connection we have. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
hopefully
Yeah.
we're still making the effort to build relationships with people in our communities locally, right?
Uh-huh.
Because
Uh-huh.
that that's reflected in the heart of Jesus, right? But
Yeah.
if we keep it insulated and keep to ourselves, then that's going to be very difficult. And that's I think that was evidenced in Caleb's story too, right? Like Caleb still maintained this conviction of going and serving God, even when all the people around him were not. You
Yeah.
know,
Yep.
that's impressive. And I can't imagine it was easy to do that.
Right.
There were probably some places where there were probably some days he doubted. He's like, do I still believe this? I know God said that to
Yeah.
me. You know what? Maybe that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like I'm just gonna chill with Joshua. I'm just gonna chill with both. Like, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like
Yep.
all those
Yep.
things are going through his mind. And yet he still at the end of the day said, no, I'm just as fired up. And
Uh-huh.
I just
Uh-huh.
I think that sentiment is something that is poetic
Yeah.
and I think real for him. I do think that was real
Yeah.
in this sense. But I think when I look back on my life, my hope is that even through all the like navigation of different responsibilities and different stages, I can still say
Uh-huh.
I'm still as fired up as I was on July 1st, 2011, when I made
Yeah.
Jesus Lord. I'm still as fired up to just talk about God, to read about him, to know him, to tell people about him, to share my life with people along with the gospel, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I think that is not only feasible, but I think that's the heart that we see here. And there's a lot to unpack within this, right? Like in terms of like maybe the relationship in terms of Caleb and his specific tribe that he's a part of,
Uh-huh.
and the calling that comes from that. Like I'm neither Chase or I, we are amateur theologians at best. We do not study this for
Yeah.
money. But
That's right.
I would encourage folks to read up on this even deeper and even check out some commentaries, right? Like check
Hmm.
out some different sermons on this story just because it's really, really fascinating. But I think it gives us keys to lifelong faith, lifelong
Yeah.
conviction, lifelong humility. That's all of those things are necessary if we are to be at the end still as passionate for God.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, man, so much of that I have thoughts. I'm trying to like do my best to filter through so I don't like go down just a random path of just like that doesn't make sense. But something that stuck out was the fact that this thought that like Caleb, like maybe none of his friends are still around or very few, and also just the other people too. Like we said, we don't see everything that happened in those 40 plus years, those 45 years where people passed away, people aren't there anymore, right? But they were still fighting for that promise. It is
Mhm.
something that we focused on when I was in Broward is that there's going to be dreams that we have, goals that we have that are long term that we might not ever actually see come to fruition, that come to fruition like
Yeah.
after we're gone, you know? And we have to be okay playing a part in that even though we don't get to reap the benefits of, the end goal, if that makes sense. And I'm sure that was the case for a lot of people that were, fighting for the promised land, right? And they never got to actually set foot in it. And something that was in the sermon, so like I told Jordan, I actually can't remember if I said this on like on record or not, but I went to this new church yesterday and checked it out, and the sermon was really great. And one of the things that we were talking about was that um this thought of um oh man, I'm totally blanking. I'm sorry. Well, I'll come back to that.
John
But
10:10. John 10:10.
yeah, we read John 10:10. Um and there was just there's just this thought of like, sorry, I'll come back to that cuz I totally blanked on where I was going with that. But I love this fact that people that pray prayers and have dreams and vision and goal and know that I might not be around to see it happen, but I'm still gonna
Mhm.
fight for it.
Yeah.
I'm still gonna play
Yeah.
a part in that, and I think that that is something that we have to be okay with. Is that trusting in the promise even if we never actually see it. And I think even of the first century Christians, right, is that they were fighting for this life that we're now able to live, and I think we take for granted, right? Like the disciples died for it. To see us in America, like, man, I want to do a better job of doing them justice of like what they fought for, like they gave their life, and they see us now to where we have freedom to, last week we talked about, when you guys started the street preaching thing when we were in Gainesville, like they they couldn't do that and not get threatened or stoned or killed. Like I think of Stephen, the speech that he gave, and then got stoned and basically kind of had a similar response as he was getting stoned as Jesus on the cross, right? Of basically like forgive them kind of thing, which is crazy. And, now we cower to like talk to someone, and share our faith. And I just see those examples and it makes me want to do a better job of being like Caleb, like having that fire, being ready to go into metaphorical battle now, but he was ready to go to real battle. And something else that I thought of is, man, I think it's so cool that back to back weeks we talked about, Jonathan and his armor bearer, and then Caleb in this story. I think there's cohesion there where, Jonathan, sees that his nation is on the brink of extinction potentially, and it says at the end of that story that they changed the fate of their nation that day, right? And he was ready to go to battle as a young man. And then you see Caleb in his old age and he's ready to go to battle for his nation so that they can have their home, It's a little bit different circumstances, but it's the same heart. And I think it's cool. I know it's two different people, but I think it's really cool to see that young passion, and then you see someone that's just as passionate and it's for God and they trust the promise of God. Jonathan asked for a sign from God, and when he sees it, he acts. And Caleb was told a promise from God and believed it. But both of them required faith and trust in God to act, and both of them were like life and death situations, and they trusted and acted, which I think is super cool. And I thought me being able to ramble, I would remember the point I was going to make earlier, but I don't. So, but something I'm
You don't
also
do
great.
the ramble to remember? The ramble to
That's what I
remember
was,
is
bro. That's what I was doing, and it did not work for me. at all. So I'm really trying to remember. There was some point that was made in the sermon yesterday. Although there's another, I don't know if this was it, but there's something else that it did remind me of from this sermon yesterday is that, you know, we were talking about how that like a moment of distraction can cause like major consequences. And the example that was given was, you know, the guy that was preaching was talking about when he had his learner's permit and he, you know, got a text message and he was trying to like read it and he was drifting and his father was in the passenger seat and his father didn't say anything. I think the road was clear. Or else, obviously, his father would have said something. But eventually, his dad just like grabbed the steering wheel. He didn't say anything. He was just like holding it. And then eventually he was like, you know, got his attention or whatever. But then he said his dad taught him a lesson of like, he's like, you know, that's how it happens, like a moment of distraction and, you know, you could be gone kind of thing. And I think of that in the context of this story is how easy it would have been for Caleb over the course of all those years waiting for this promise to look at another piece of land and being like, well, that land doesn't look so bad. Like, why don't I just go take that land? Or, you know, why don't I do this or that? Or this is taking too long. And, you know, although I'm sure like we've said, he had hard moments, he didn't allow distractions to take away from the promise that God had given him, which I think is super, super cool. And I think that, you know, that's a great example for us is that, you know, whether we've been a Christian for a year, for 30 years, for 50 years, for 25 years, however long, you know, there is a promise of heaven that's waiting for us. You know, I don't want to see people get distracted, you know, by enamours of the world, you know, I mean, think that that's going to be better than, you know, our home that is promised to us. And I think for us, like for Jordan and I, this is just something that like kind of was put on my heart, like as we're discussing this is, you know, this podcast, we kind of started it just as a way for us to reconnect, for us to kind of share our stories with people. But we really did like have this goal of like, man, I hope this helps people. Like, I hope this helps people reconnect with a friend. I hope this helps people, you know, re-spark their faith or continue their faith or whatever. But, you know, a goal that I think would be super cool because so Jordan and I, so much of the memories that we built together, and I think what built our friendship so much is the work we did together for God in other people's lives, like the way God used us to help other people. And we've talked, you know, I think in the very first episode, like our friend Brian, who we studied the Bible with, and how Jordan met his wife through being a groomsman in his wedding. And then our friend Nolan, like the part that we played in his walk with God and him becoming one of our best friends. And, you know, there's a bunch of other things. And it didn't all necessarily mean studying the Bible with someone, but, you know, leading Bible talks together. If I'm not mistaken, we preached and did like it was like a three people preached, and Jordan and I were two of the people that
Yeah, that's
preached,
right.
you
It
know,
was Dave
like,
Snyder.
yeah. So we, you know, we tag teamed a sermon together. You know, there was all these things that we were able to do that God, you know, blessed us. And I think that a lot of the memories that we have in the way we built our friendship was like we talked about in the very first episode of The Lost Art of Connection, is where you know, it start with like silly things, you know, like football and movies and quoting TV shows and things like that, which we still do. But really the deepness and the deep bond, the deep connection came from, you know, helping people get closer to God and teaching people about God and things like that. So a goal that I kind of have for us is I really hope that someone that we don't know, you know, sees this podcast and we're able to like, you know, study the Bible with them over, you know, FaceTime or Zoom or whatever. And kind of, you know, from opposite sides of the country, still be able to like study the Bible with someone or impact somebody's life in that way, I think would be a super cool thing. Because, you know, we have a lot of like random goals for the podcast. Like we definitely want it to grow and we want it to be something that's fun for us and fun for people to listen to. But ultimately, like if it doesn't help people, then there's no business in doing it. And so I really do hope that, you know, God can use the podcast and our voice to help, you know, at least one person through this process to like become a Christian or, you know, at least like give it a shot, you know, to where someone gives God a shot. Cause that's kind of what I ask of people, like when they want to like read the Bible. I'm like, man, like working with teens, I'm like, I used to tell them that is that, you know, I would talk specifically to the kids because you always have those handful of kids that are like too cool for God or too cool for church, you know, or not interested at all. You know, I kind of plead with those kids, like, just give them a shot, you know, like give them a shot and see what happens. And it was really cool because about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, something like that, a kid that I had in the teens when I was in Broward got baptized, and I was on the phone with Tuan, one of my good friends, Tuan, we were catching up a little bit, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to a baptism." I was like, "Oh, who's getting anybody that I know?" kind of thing. And he was like, "Oh, Caleb," and I thought it was a different Caleb. I was like, "Oh, Caleb." So and so, and he's like, no, like, and I was like, what? I was like, and I was super excited because I was just like, man, like when I had him, he wasn't interested, and that's the humbling thing too, right? Is that like I just wasn't the person, to be able to spark that interest, and I'm grateful someone else was. And so I was just super excited to hear that he had made that decision. But yeah, I just really hope that we can use this platform and this podcast to meet people that we don't know, that are just curious and want to know about God, and we can kind of share our story with them. So, but yeah, I think that the story from, that I shared last week and this one has really cool parallels. And I think it's really cool that one was really young and one was, on the older side of, towards the end of life, which is super cool. So anyways, hopefully you're cool with that goal. I kind of just put it on you.
Yeah, man, get me off this joint. Wow, that's also there. And, how much of that is also reflective of just Caleb's heart, right?
Yeah,
Because,
yeah,
that's the goal with the pod, like, right? Like, yes, we want to see it grow, and yes, we want people to see our friendship, but it's also like, like the real focus is around, like, does this help people feel connection? Does this help people feel
yeah,
close to one another? And does it help spiritually rejuvenate them too, right? Like,
yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think even just this idea around, like, are we still gonna do this work even if we don't see those promises of growth, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that's just the reality, right? Like, and I think there's is dope because Caleb. I think there's a reason why we don't see the nitty gritty of the in between days and in the years. It's just like, they went through ups and downs. There were times where he looked, like you said, like he looked at the different lands and say, should I just say, that land look good. It looks plentiful, looks profitable. Like the people there look friendly, right? But the message we can take is there's nothing better. There's nothing that will be better. I was trying to find a really dramatic way to say it. I'm not that wise. Let me just say it plainly. It's better to just, God's promises are superior to anything, right? Like, and we shouldn't be settling for
Yeah.
anything less than God's promises.
Yep. Yep.
Like, there's no need for us to settle for less than God's promises.
No.
And Caleb was not willing to do that. Like, at the end of the day, he's like, you know what? Like, I want this because that's what God has given me the opportunity or the means to do. And that's okay to have that as the standard. And I think for us, like, ultimately the standard is around helping people, and this is a medium for doing that. And so, like, we'll continue that in this way, as well as, like, continue it for just hopefully, like, y'all get some laughs out of it at the end. As we
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, and if that's something that you all take away, like, it's, in my mind, it's a success as well.
Yeah.
So I think I might have caught the ramble bug, 'cause I'm like, yep, where am I going with that? But I do resonate with that aspect of, not settling for less than God's gift or God's promises.
Yep. Yep. And that's something else, that we were talking about yesterday in the sermon that I heard, was that, John 10:10, it talks about, that Christ has come to give life and life to the full. And there was this thought of, with the world, with things that are temporary, like you're always going to have to refill. It's always going to end, it's always going to not be fulfilling. It might fulfill for a period of time, a short period of time, but it's not sustaining. And that's what life to the full is that you can never run out of God's love, God's eternal life, his promises. Like it's always going to be full. You're never going to have to look for something else. Like, well, what else does God got? What else does God got? It's like, no, like he's enough. And what he's given is enough. His words are enough. His promises are enough. His love is enough. Everything that he gives us is enough. It's sufficient, and it's more than
Yeah.
enough. Right. And
Yeah.
and I think that is so comforting, is that even when we don't feel that way, it is true. And so there's comfort in that, to knowing that is true. And now that Jordan has agreed to it, to my kind of goal, I'm going to clip this. So if you are watching this clip and you happen to come across this little short clip, I think that it means that God is reaching out to you. So if you're someone that's looking for faith, that's looking for answers, that wants to know God more, reach out to us. Hit us up in the DMs, and Jordan and I will be happy to talk to you. If you're a guy, if you're a girl that's come across this, Jordan has a wonderful wife, and I'm sure she would be willing to speak with you. I have a wonderful sister, and I know a lot of great women of God. Even if you are a woman, we can help you out too. So reach out to us. But we're about an hour here. So, man, I love these little scrolling through the scriptures, and I'm looking forward to doing this more. I'm grateful we started with our favorite stories, but there is a abundance of stories. And so, like I said earlier, if you have a favorite story, let us know, whether it's just dropping in the verse itself or the story itself, or if you want to like give us an explanation, that's cool too. So DM us and let us know. And it's stuff that Jordan and I can study out. And like we said, we're amateur Bible scholars. I love to dive into the Word and learn, and that's something that I feel like I excel at. And so I would love to be able to break down people's favorite stories and bring it to others. And I definitely want to give credit to the people that give us the stories, and maybe we'll have people on too, like as guests, whatever. We'll figure it out as we go. But thank you so much for joining us. We love you guys. We're really appreciative of the people that have joined us on this journey and will continue to join us. And if you're new, we really appreciate you stopping and listening to the pod. So like, share, subscribe. I just want to remind you too of our donation page. It is called Coffee, KO/in with Denoux. And we would be really grateful for that. As we've said in the past, we just want to make things better for you in the early going, towards equipment, towards different things. And so thank you guys again, and we will see you next week. We're signing off.
Yeah.